Hello, sixth grade innovators. This is Mr. Chamberlain, and if you're watching this video, then you've at least gotten your Raspberry Pi to start up and you've made your first folder. So congratulations on that. I have a picture here of the very first setup we're going to do to make our Raspberry Pi light up a little LED light bulb. It's super satisfying when it works. You might get really frustrated as you go along, but it's very satisfying when you're successful. So I want to point out a few things. We're going to need several things like in this picture to set up our circuit. So I want to point out a couple things to you first. Here's your Raspberry Pi. Do you notice the little pins that are sticking out on your Raspberry Pi? It looks like a comb almost. All of these are little pins. Each little pin does something different, but generally it's a spot that you can tell your Raspberry Pi to send electricity through, which is what we're going to do with this circuit. So the things that I want you to get in a second here are, you already have a Raspberry Pi. You're going to grab two wires. It does not matter what color they are. You're going to grab one LED light. It does not matter what color it is. You're going to grab one of these little, I don't know how to describe what they look like. They're tiny, but they're called resistors. So you're going to grab one of those and then see this big white thing here? This is called a breadboard. It's about the same size as your Raspberry Pi, but you're going to need one of those. So basically one of everything in the picture. But there is something else that you absolutely have to get and need to get used to using right away. On your Raspberry Pi, where these little pins are sticking out for like a comb, each pin has a different name that eventually when you use the Raspberry Pi you just kind of learn to memorize. But for now we have these little cheat sheets. Basically they're cardstock that tell you what each of these pins represent. Ours doesn't look exactly like this, but it looks really similar to it. On the bottom it's got a little Highview Hawk that says Hawk Pride, but otherwise it has all of these little symbols for what everything represents. So I want you to go ahead and grab one of those too, and you're going to slide it right on top of the Raspberry Pi. You'll know if you slid it on right because the top overhangs a little bit from the Raspberry Pi. So you want to get the little piece of cardstock, put it right over all the holes just right, and then grab one of each of these things. So I'm going to say pause the instructions right now, go grab all that stuff, and then come on back. Okay, if you've unpaused it, that means you've got everything you need. What I want you to do now is set up this little circuit exactly like you see it in my picture. So you're going to want to put one of the wires in the third hole on the right. If you don't know what the third hole on the right is, you have your little card on it and it should match up to the letters G and D, which means ground. Just a place for our circuit to finish. The other wire should plug in on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th spot down. But again, you don't have to count it. Just look for the spot that says GP17 on your little card that you've put over the top. That means it's pin 17. So we're going to command the Raspberry Pi from pin 17. You'll take your pin 17, you'll plug it into your breadboard, you'll pop it in there. When you put in your LED, you will notice, if you look very carefully, that one of the legs is longer than the others, one of the pieces of metal. We want the longer side to go in first if we're starting at the Pi and going this way. We want the longer leg to go in first and the slightly shorter leg to go in second. If you don't do that, it won't work. You'll find that out shortly. Then you're going to pop your resistor in at this spot, here and here. And then finally, you're going to have your last wire going all the way from there across to the ground. Now, maybe right now you're having a hard time seeing this. I tried to make it really big on the screen. So if you look on the corner of this YouTube video, way down here, there is a little gear button. If you click the gear button, you can change the quality of the video. You want it to be HD, so high def quality, which is usually 720. So if your little gear doesn't have the letters HD on it, you should click it and switch it to at least 720. It's going to make it much easier to see everything that I do. So again, I'm going to pause and I'm going to let you right now put in everything to make it look like this. Okay, go for it. Okay, so I'm going to put this picture away because I'm going to unveil the code that we're going to use now. So this is the actual thing we're going to tell the Raspberry Pi to do to turn on the little LED light bulb. When we write our code, we use an application that's called Python. So to get to Python, I'm going to go up to the corner where the Raspberry Pi is. I'm going to click it and go under Programming. I have a whole bunch of things in my programming selection. You might have slightly fewer. That's okay. But we're going to go down to Python 3. Everything we ever code will be in Python 3. And when I click it, you're going to notice that my Python screen is much bigger than your Python screen. Look at this. This is behemoth. This is huge. But that's actually so it's easier for you to see. We've noticed that students had a harder time seeing the code when I use the smaller one. So this is basically a place where you write your code. We don't actually write the code on this screen. This is called the shell. The shell is just the place where we see what happens when you do the code. So we're going to go to File and a New File, because that's going to let us write a new set of code. And so now I've got a place that I can start writing. Right off the bat, on the code here that we're going to put in, you'll see the first thing is red and it has a hashtag. Anytime you put in a hashtag, that's not telling the computer to do anything. It's just giving yourself a note. For example, we're saying this code is for the flashing LED. So we don't even have to write it. We're going to start writing where everything is here. Okay? So I'm just literally going to write what it says word for word. So the first thing says from GPIO0 import LED. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, did you notice that I capitalized L and E and D and I didn't capitalize anything else? If you are one capitalization off or one space off, it won't work. The code just won't work. For example, let's say I did this and I accidentally got off by a little bit. The computer will not know what you're talking about if you have a space between there. So it has to literally look exactly like mine. Mr. Lundberg and I have noticed that students who have a problem, it's almost always because of a typing error. So you're going to get used to seeing all the things that could go wrong. Anyway, I'm going to press enter and go on to the next line. It says from time import sleep. And I'll tell you what that means shortly. I'm going to press enter twice because it wants us to skip a spot. Now we're going to put in something called a variable. The variable is my LED. That's just saying I'm going to name something and I'm going to give it a specific name for the computer. So my LED equals capital LED. I've got an open mark here, 17, and a closed mark. Now I'm going to press enter again, and I'm going to put in this final bit of code. While true. Did you notice I capitalized the T in true? If you didn't capitalize it, it's not going to work. Then I press enter. Notice how it's spaced over. That's on purpose. I'll explain that in a second too. So my LED dot on sleep 1. My LED dot off sleep 1. And believe it or not, that's the entire code. Now let's talk a second about what this means. I just told the computer that we want to use something called an LED, which means one of the little pins. We know we're going to use a pin. We already put the pin cover on. We're going to also use the word sleep in this code. So I'm basically just telling the computer, go into your library and get ready to use these words. My next thing is a variable, which is simply my way of saying I want to call my LED the 17 pin. Again, we put that little cover on the pin. LED 17 means we want electricity to go through 17 on your Raspberry Pi. Now the actual real code. While true just means if it's turned on, then my LED turns on. So pin 17 turns on electricity. Sleep just means wait. So turn my LED on and then wait for a second. Then turn my LED off, then wait for a second. And since I have this all as while true, it's going to keep doing this sequence over and over and over until I tell it to stop. So what we should see is the little LED should blink on for a second, then turn off for a second, then turn on for a second, and so on. Now is the moment of truth. Assuming you typed in everything correctly, we press one button to run the code. Look at the top of your keyboard. there is a button that says F5. It's above the 6 and the 7. It's a big button that says F5. If I press F5, that will start the program. But you can't start the program that you wrote until you've saved your code, which is actually a really good thing to do in case something happened to your Pi. So I'm going to press OK. And now we have to be really careful with how we do this. We're going to save something, right? But we have to save it in the folder that we made. I gave you the example earlier that if you're period 2 and your name is Will, then we made a folder called period 2 Will. Before you give a name to your program, double click on your folder. Now whatever we write is going to go inside of your folder. So now for the name, we're going to always keep it the same. We're going to say our period, so period 2, your first name, Will, and then whatever the program is trying to do. So we're trying to get an LED to blink. So I might call this period 2 Will LED. Now, as soon as you save, it's going to actually run the program. So if I press save, the shell opens up and it's saying we're going to start this program. If you did everything perfectly, you should now see that your LED is blinking. If you did something wrong with your code, so in other words, if the words you put in, if you have something off like this, let me do a lowercase LED. I'm going to run the same program. I'm going to say okay because it saves it. When I try to run it in the shell, it might say that everything's okay. Oh, nope. Look, it has this big giant red thing that says something has gone wrong. And it even tells me what's gone wrong. It looks like I don't even understand these words, but I see it says line 1. Well, line 1 is right here. It's the first line of code that we wrote. It's saying, I don't know what LED is. Well, of course we don't know what LED is because I said it only knows it as a capital. So when I try to run my program now I see that my little bulb is blinking. Everything is working perfectly. Let me try another example. Let's say I put my LED without the period on there and I try to run it. It's going to say, okay, I'm running the program, but then it doesn't seem to work. Look, again, I had a big red blob that came in. I don't know what's going on, but it says line 7. So if I go from the beginning, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's saying something's wrong there. Well, we already know, look, it's my LED dot on. So if you get a big red message, it's telling you something that you wrote in the code is wrong. You can find out what it is by looking where it says line. Now, if you did it correctly, it should start blinking and it should work. And if it does, then you did it. Congratulations, you figured it out. But let's say you run it, like I've got everything right now, right? So I'm going to press F5 to run it. It says we've started, and look, there's no error coming up. Everything's perfect. But I look at my bulb and it's not blinking. If that's the case and your bulb isn't blinking, then I still know what's wrong. What's wrong is on your actual circuit, you must have done something wrong. You must have put the wrong pin in the wrong spot. Maybe you got your card upside down when you put it on. Maybe you didn't put the long leg in first on here. Maybe you didn't get the resistor on the same spot, the same row as the bulb. I guarantee you, if the code is good and there's nothing coming up here, but it won't blink, it's something like that. Sometimes the bulb is dead. That doesn't happen very often, but it could be a dead bulb or a dead wire or a dead resistor. But I guarantee you, if you can at least get to this part and have no red error, then there's something going on with the way you built it. So just try using a new wire. Try making sure that your wires are all going in a line. See, it goes up through here in the bulb, straight down and over. All of those things you want to check. But when you do get it to work, like I said, it's the best feeling in the world. So please, if it doesn't work, do not raise your hand and say, I don't get it. You know the tools that you have. You can check out what line the problem is in. It just means that you wrote your code incorrectly. And if it doesn't say there's anything wrong, then there's a mechanical problem with the way that you physically set it up. So I invite you to try and get it. A lot of people don't get it right the first time. But like I said, when you do, it's the best feeling in the world. So good luck.